Hey everybody, it's Coach Hughes here from the Be Best You podcast. The idea is, in order to lead others, you need to become the best version of yourself. In episode 14, I'll be speaking with Chris Edmonds. He's the author of one of my favorite books called The Culture Engine, and he also just wrote another book called Good Comes First. I'm really excited to get to talk to Chris, so here you go. I'm really honored to get to speak with author of multiple books, Chris Edmonds. Hello, Chris.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
I came across your book about 5 years ago called The Culture Engine, and I was developing some curriculum for some classes that I'm doing. And culture was this kind of thing that no one really talked about, and to me, it is really the cornerstone, the foundation of any organization, whether it be a company, whether it be a team, sports, whether it be a family. And I fell in love with the book. It's one of the very rare books it was very easy to read as well. One of the few books that I've actually picked up and continuously read over a couple of days. Lots of times I'll pick up a book and I'll go maybe over a week or 2 weeks. It'll take me to read. And subsequently, you just came about with the new book you can see behind me called Good Comes First, which is additional information, but as you speak through the book, updating what you learned from the Culture Engine. Exactly. But in true fashion of being a good interview and learning this, I don't want to do the talking. I'd like to ask good questions and then, like we said, get out of the way. But if you wouldn't mind, maybe just starting off a little bit about how you came to become an author and a little bit about your background, and then we can get into I'd like to talk a little bit about the Culture Engine, and then maybe talk a little bit secondly about the Good Comes First. So a little bit about your expertise and how you came into this field of culture and leadership and such.
Good, John. Well, thank you again for the opportunity to join you. Culture has always been a huge passion, and I have always been an observer. And so way back when in my first jobs, God, I turned 15 in 1967. So I've been around a long time. But in those days, you had to go out, you had to get a job. Many folks tried to work for their families or friends or whatnot. So I started with my dad and I thought, no, I'm not going to work in a mortgage industry. So I started working and I began to appreciate leaders' impact. And most of the time, I was dealing with pretty young supervisors, often first-time supervisors, and some of them had good instincts, some of them had lousy instincts, but they all had a tendency to model what had passed before them and model kind of the expectations of their own bosses. So as I began to kind of go off, finish high school, go into college, get into the music thing, be able to start to work for many, many more and sometimes more experienced bosses, the result was the same. There were some folks that had good instincts, some had lousy ones, but often it was hard to really break through and to be not only conscious of your impact, but ensure that your impact is positive. What a surprise. So I had in the Culture Engine, one of the things I celebrated was my best boss in my nonprofit days. I was a YMCA executive for 15 years. And I had such wonderful experiences there. Yes, guitars around the campfire, that was happening. But and I was paying attention to leaders and paying attention to those leaders that had beneficial impact, that could get wonderful things out of teams working cooperatively as opposed to individuals competing against each other. So I bragged on Jerry Nutter, my best boss in the Culture Engine, did a little bit of that in the new book. But what really was interesting for me, and I was blessed, this was back in 95, to meet Ken Blanchard, was working for a quasi-government agency, and we brought Ken in to help us. And I was doing leadership development, much as you are, John. And so was able to take Ken up to our senior leadership retreat up in Napa. We were in San Francisco at the time. And on the way back, he says, "You're pretty smart. I wonder if you'd like to come work for us." Well, of course, I believed him. But it took a year or so, and I began working for Ken and learned a great deal. Wonderful thinker, wonderful communicator, and surrounded by some folks that he and his wife Margie met in college, who are still in their business. So Ken's 1 Minute Manager and situational leadership, wonderful foundational leadership models and practices. And what happened is a book called Gung Ho came out in the mid 90s, got a great deal of traction, wonderful story, parable like, which is Ken's kind of niche. But we were asked to build a training program around that. So that's really where I was able to start to test some of my ideas about how do we duplicate great leadership practices, great leadership kind of beliefs, and improve the quality of experiences that employees have. So I started that in 1990, joined Blanchard full-time in 1995, and really have for the last 10 years been very proactive, been doing much, much, much less with Blanchard, officially retired with them a couple of 3 years ago because my own business focused on culture leadership was kind of keeping me off the streets, keeping me busy. So the passion has always been there. I think what really helped me gain confidence that I could put a book together, that I could write a book, that people would actually see it, be interested in it, learn from it, make their organizations better. And so that hardcover book, Over Your Right Shoulder, was really the first one. And it was, I'd done some soft covers before then on leadership, customer service, kind of the classic kinds of approaches. But what was missing was culture. What was missing was a reliable model that leaders could look at and go, oh, I see how that's working now in my own company. And often leaders have never been asked to manage the health of their work cultures. They often don't really have the tools, or are they expected to change that culture if they find that something's missing, something's amiss, there's lousy behavior, etc. So what I really set out to do, and was thrilled to death that the Wiley organization wanted to publish it back in 2014, was to be able to take this proven process and to say, this works, and here's what it looks like, and here's what some of my clients' experiences have been. And so that you're exactly right. The Culture Engine was designed to be a bit of a workbook. There's actually worksheets in the book to help leaders if they choose to kind of dive into that. But I've been doing, I would say, for 20 years, proactive culture leadership consulting with senior leaders of big companies, small companies, and it's amazing, those folks that really embrace this. At some stage, I'm sure we'll talk about the pandemic and the impact on virtually all businesses, but the ones that embrace these kind of philosophies are not having a tough time filling jobs. They are not losing staff because people are paid well, they're validated and respected, and they want to stay. What a surprise.
Right. Yeah, I mean, amazing. I mean, I love, observe. That's one of my favorite things to do. I think over the years, my dad was a coach. My mom was a music teacher. That my nickname is Coach. And I think that's one of the things that I see a lot of people, they always talk about, leaders are good communicators, and you can't, and listening is one of the biggest parts of communication. And you can't listen when you're talking, and all those different analogies. And I just love that observe. And Ken Blanchard, I mean, 1 Minute Manager, that's not the cornerstone of every leadership's bookcase, then I'm not sure what book is. Maybe 7 Habits, or but that's must have been wonderful to get to work with him. The framework that I actually use, and I love, you talk about a vision statement rather than a mission statement, similar, but there are some differences, and you spell that out in the Culture Engine. In the course that I put together, what I found is on day one, we do a life assessment. And the idea is that in order to lead others, you need to be the best version of yourself. So day one, they take a life assessment. And then at that point, we then, rather than ask how or talk about what they want to become and talk about their goals yet, we talk about their habits second. So we talk about what your first step is, who are you today? The second step is, how did you get here? Review of your habits. And then before you start charting your course to who you want to become, you have to address those habits first. And then we talk about some of the culture comes in, where we talk about our core values being kind of, I use the analogy of the cornerstones of the foundation.
Yeah.
And then you write your mission statement, which is and also the manifesto.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we actually chart it out, and have them go through a process. And in your book, The Culture Engine, you speak quite a bit about, and even further into good. Good comes first. You talk about the importance of um, having a purpose, a why, a mission, or, which I love, which I hadn't really heard of before, but a vision statement.
Yeah.
Can you kind of speak a little bit about that? What's the value of a vision statement, and why is that kind of so important?
Yeah, I appreciate you catching on to that, John. It so fits your philosophy and the work you're trying to do. And it's interesting. I've always looked at mission statements, vision statements as being a bit more future oriented, a bit more aspirational. And so what we wanted to do was to help leaders realize that purpose can be a bit more powerful because it can be a bit more tactical. So the idea of purpose, and yes, having a future oriented mission or vision statement makes a lot of sense. But if you want that vision to come true, you've got to be able to have people make connections to. So what are we really accomplishing here? What are we in business to do? And early on, this is 20 years ago, and I remember having coached senior leaders to go out and interview select next level leaders, frontline supervisors in their businesses. And some of these are global in nature, and some of them are all under one roof, right, with 30 people in the whole business, everything in between. So go ask people what the purpose of the business is. And when we could, it was a little hard to do that early in the 90s, but by the 2000s, there were video cameras. So go video those interviews and then come back and show them to us. And what was fascinating was the majority of the answers they got around what's our present day purpose is: to make money, to make widgets, whatever those widgets are, to serve our investors. And some of that, if you're private, you may not have that messaging so bold. If you're public, you probably will. But as we came back to, okay, so you've asked your own people. I haven't gone out and interviewed them, because then you can say, well, you just asked questions that would get the answer you want, right? And it's no, you asked them. And so none of them is saying how we improve the lives of our customers or how we improve our communities. And so probably a year after the publication of the Culture Engine, I began centering on servant purpose as a more effective vision statement. And so servant leadership has been around a long time, but it's often misunderstood. And the reality is that if you have a purpose that, and say you're a boss in an organization, you've got layers of bosses above you, you have a parent company somewhere, it could be public, could be private, but there's messaging about what's important and about what gets measured. And as I ask senior leaders about what gets measured around here, it's often profits, revenue, market share, widgets out the door. It's very classic industrial age thinking. And I'm thinking, okay, that's important. I get that results are good things, but how we go about getting those results is probably more important today than it's ever been. And this gets us to that servant purpose piece. So I remember an organization that I was working with in the early aughts. They were a catalog company. And so they printed catalogs. And so they had the largest independently non-postal post office in their plant, because they did so many mailings every day. I don't think there was another private facility in the States that had hosted a full-fledged USPS operation in their building. And yet, as we started to look at, who are your best people? Who do the customers love? Who do the customers rave about? Which all of a sudden led us to, well, if our salespeople are delivering what they promise, that's pretty important. Well, but what's the right promise? And that's what we got to. And so these guys moved from a clearly understood and reinforced purpose of making money
Mhm.
to a clearly reinforced servant purpose of helping our customers' businesses succeed. Because it didn't matter if they were, selling John Deere equipment or house dresses or sandwiches or what have you. And what that did was start to release people. I talk about driving with the emergency brakes on. We don't do that quite as much anymore because there's modern cars that remind us and beep at us and whatnot.
Yeah,
But but
true.
it's having things get in the way of forward motion of where you want to go. And if the only thing you want to do is make money, you can tolerate some pretty lousy behaviors by humans to get there. And yet,
Sure.
if your servant purpose is to help our customers' businesses succeed, one of my clients is a electrical contractor. Their servant purpose is peace of mind. They don't want people
Mm.
plugging something in a year later and getting a shock. So it's an interesting shift to how are you serving others? Because the money's important. I get it. The money's important. But you've got to be able to communicate and genuinely live a purpose that benefits the community. And there's hard work involved in that. And some have said, well, we sent a bunch of folks out to do Habitat for Humanity in the spring. And there's 10
Right.
folks that go and serve meals on Thanksgiving morning. No, every day, every day. So does that help that a little bit?
No, absolutely. Yeah. One of the things, and I love it in both books, you speak of it, the industrial, how it was about profits, and then how you had the bosses were more about results. And in what I teach is I've come up with my 5 P's, and the first P is purpose. The second P is people. And then we talk about product, procedures, profit. And we try to switch it where most companies, their purpose is profit. And
Absolutely.
what they do is they say they have good product, and they manage everything through their procedures, and then the people piece is kind of that all unnecessary evil, so to speak. And
Cogs in
what are the company I've been with for, gosh, almost 40 years now. The owner is somebody that he understands the value of culture. We've had to kind of come up with a mission statement recently in the last maybe 7 or 8 years. We actually came out with a manifesto about 7, 8 years ago as well. But for me, what I found was he kind of lived the culture. He lived every day how he felt everybody else should be. My job was to come behind him and kind of, because people would come and say, well, how do I build what you guys have?
exactly.
And it used to be, well, just watch what he does and do that. But it was,
Do what he does, do what she does.
yeah, yeah. So I that's what I love about both of your books is that what you gave me help with is I kind of had these abstract kind of ideas, and what your books were able to do is actually put them in, and you used the word earlier, tangible, tactical. It's a roadmap, and I think that's the beauty. That's why I'm excited to be able to share these books with the people I'm talking to, because we could talk about culture.
Yeah.
You can feel it, but what you've been able to do is really lay the blueprint out and the steps to follow in order to create that culture, whether it be in an organization or on a team, or again in a family.
Volunteer operation. Well, thank you, John. I appreciate that. And I think one of the pieces that was most frustrating for me, especially as an executive coach, was I could walk people through and in both books, we call it the define stage. You define what you want. Then the
Right.
hard part is aligning all players, practices, behaviors to that kind of defined, desirable culture. And then you refine sometimes people and sometimes processes over time. So it's define, align, refine. And once I got leaders to
Love
get
that.
excited about defining their culture, and I would then guide them, they ended up with very solid, tangible, observable behaviors, which is hard to do. But where they
Mhm.
fell apart was the alignment piece. They were unable to make the commitment to no longer tolerate bad behavior, to let someone make us a lot of money, but still cuss and scream when he comes into the office, or she does X or Y or Z. And so there was that toxic behavior that was just this difficult thing to manage. And I totally get that. And so literally what I began doing with those early clients was say, okay, tell me how you manage performance. Oh, they've got systems, they've got dashboards, they've got clear expectations, ways of measuring it. Way back when we were with an early internet platform, let's put it that way. And they had those early players in that organization were watching stock go up. They'd never been stockholders before. That was one of the comps, right? The perks that they got when they joined. And they could sit there and watch every hour to see the New York Stock Exchange on their computers. Nobody had smartphones doing much back in 95. But in any case, the idea of, are you disciplined about creating performance expectations, monitoring performance expectations, and maybe holding people accountable? Well, the accountability was the worst, but there was a bit of comfort with, okay, I need clear goals. I need to monitor how we're doing on those goals. I need to inspire people to exceed those goals. And I thought, okay, good. That's the performance management kind of mindset that all leaders have, but that's only half the leader's job. The other half is ensuring a respectful, values-based environment and an experience where people are validated and respected for their ideas, insights, and contributions every day. And that's very, very, very unusual. So I literally said, well, then let's take the same skill set that you'd use to manage performance and apply it to respect. And they're like, you can't, if we have we want people to have integrity. How are you going to measure that? Okay, that's what we get to. We get to observable behaviors. You formalize those, and then you measure the tar out of them. And then you have two powerful, undeniable data kind of sources. One is on performance, one is on respect. And that's a lot of work, but it literally means that these leaders have to make a mind shift to say, well, my job isn't just managing results. It's managing results in a respectful environment. And that's not going to happen if the leader delegates it or assumes it.
Yeah. And again, speaking through the book, through multiple chapters, today they talk about how difficult it is to find people. And one of the things that I speak to our groups about is that pay is kind of the bait, but culture is what keeps people.
Yeah.
And then you were talking earlier too, is you can come up with a vision statement, you can come up with your company's core values, but then if you don't put those into practice, and not just wear them on a t-shirt or have them on a poster in the break room, how do you integrate those into the day-to-day? I mean, every day, all day, throughout all of your correspondences and communications. That's the hard part. I mean, coming up with a vision statement, coming up with your manifesto, coming up with your core values, they're not easy if you really do the work right.
Exactly.
But they don't really mean anything if you don't have the ability or the way to continue to manifest them, continue to push them through. I think of a couple things. My daughter's a collegiate athlete, and you wonder why certain athletes will go to certain schools. And lots of times, in my daughter's case, she picked it because of the coach and the way she was made to feel, and that's such a big part of how to recruit people today. And you speak of that again through your books, where people are today, especially the younger folk, the millennials, and now you got the Gen Zs, where they're want to work for purpose rather than pay.
They
right?
do.
That's what you're finding.
Absolutely. And my co-author, Mark Babbitt, God love him. We talk every day, as you can imagine. And we keep thinking, should I put that in the book? And it's like, okay, so that's the next book, right? But the reality is that there's not a labor shortage today. There's a respect shortage. And what that really means to leaders is, if people don't experience civility at minimum, respect, validation for their ideas, efforts, and contributions, then the connection isn't very strong. And as you say, Gen Zs are not going to put up with old school command and control, autocratic, my way or the highway thinking. It's going to be go. And
Yeah.
what's interesting about the pandemic, despite its vicious impact on the human species, is that employees have a voice.
Right.
And they're now seen as having probably the greatest choice available to them. And we're now up to 44 million American workers have voluntarily quit in 2021. That's only through November. 44 million. That's the highest ever recorded. And so there's something happening here. People are leaving toxic workplaces, toxic bosses, toxic colleagues. And the trick is, you don't want to just be slightly better than the toxic, right, career they
Right.
just
Yeah.
left. You need to be at the pinnacle, which is serving others, having values that are behaviorally defined and leaders that demonstrate it and hold people accountable for it.
Yeah. Now that's the second book, Good Comes First. What's the premise of that book, and from maybe from the Culture Engine, and then moving into this book here? It's 7 years later.
Yeah.
Things change. You were wanting to add certain. You actually talk about that in the first couple of chapters. So
Yeah,
good comes first. What's a little bit about that?
we started Good Comes First. Mark and I have known each other for 6, 7 years, worked together for about
Mm.
3. And we both had written our real books, hardcover books in 2014. So it's like, we need to do a project together. And we actually came at it, and this was 3 years ago plus, 4 years ago, from a future of work standpoint, that the younger generations are not going to put up with some industrial age thinking. That was our
Right.
premise. And we started interviewing CEOs, got some great information. And then the pandemic hit. And our publisher, Matt Holt, who's at Ben Bella Books, and he was my publisher at Wiley for the Culture Engine. So I kind of followed Matt as he opened up his own imprint here last year with Ben Bella Books, was to
Okay.
say, Matt said, this is not a pandemic book. This isn't about COVID and about the impact of it. There's going to be need for leaders, no matter what coming generations evolve to want. They're not going to be able to behave in industrial age ways. And so we made a pretty quick pivot, and we wrote the book in about a year, but that's because we had written 2 early proposals in the first 2 years and completely
Right.
pivoted to the Good Comes First ideology and what our foundation is. And we think about engagement and how engagement's been, let's call it a source of focus for 25 years or so. And Gallup was the first ones to really do that and to measure it effectively with their Q12. But the problem is
Sure.
that engagement has stayed at 34, 35% in the US for all of those years, despite billions invested, programs, t-shirts, etc. It wasn't sustainable. It didn't sustain, or it was unusual for it to sustain. And so we realized that we need to have leaders pay greater attention to engagement.
Mhm.
And the employee experience is one that those leaders are actually in control of. They may not think so, and they may not know how to change it, but they've got to be aware of how next level leaders treat their direct reports. And
Yeah.
is bullying happening? Is harassment happening? And unfortunately, in our experience, we know that it happens all too often, and there's no consequences. So
Right.
in essence, what we were able to do, I think, is to basically present a refined view of a couple of the same models, but also introduce a couple of new models in Good Comes First with cornerstones
Mhm.
that we have consistently seen over the last 30 years in organizations with healthy, let's even call them vibrant cultures. We talk about uncompromising cultures in the subtitle of the Good Comes First book. But more importantly, it's the employee experience. And how do you make sure that people are being treated with respect in every interaction? Now, you want to talk about a high bar. And it means that leaders can't assume that good things
Yeah.
are happening, that people are being nice to each other.
Yeah. I mean, and the book is broken up into I guess, is it three steps, three parts? Can you
Yeah.
explain those? Because similar to what I said earlier, where I have found that step one is a life assessment, then a reevaluation of your habits and so on and so forth. And there's maybe 5 or 6 steps in the process that I kind of lay out in my course. But in your book, you have 3 steps. Can you share those 3 main pieces in order to become a good comes first company or
The,
team?
the foundation remains that define the culture you want, align the culture you want, and refine that culture over time. And the trick is, again, to have leaders increase their awareness of the actual day-to-day employee experience. And that means
Mhm.
lots of data. You're going to learn stuff that's dirty. You're going to learn stuff isn't as nice as you would like. Or you're going to learn that people have been taking shortcuts. And,
Yeah.
and many of those things dismiss employees, demean employees, discount employees. And so
Mhm.
that initial stage of defining exactly what you want, and we go basically to servant purpose. What are you in business to actually do from a benefit to others, benefit to customers, benefit to community standpoint? That's an interesting place
Mhm.
to go. And we know that
Yeah.
100% of the time you spend on is managing results, but you're missing the respect side. So how do we get you to maybe delegate some time, energy over here? You've got dashboards. The results monitoring is not going to stop if you back off of it. Invest 10, 20 hours a week on respect, which
Right.
means you have to define what you want. And that gets back to let's go back to the how do you manage performance? You set clear goals, you manage and monitor those, and you hopefully praise alignment and coach those that aren't aligned. But on the respect side, you have to be very, very, very specific. This is that define stage of what you mean by what value. And so I'll never forget working with the world's largest retailer. They were a 3-state region when I started working with them, and they grew to 7 states. Just phenomenal results in that 7-state region
Right.
because the senior leader got it. He realized that the respect piece had to be formalized. And so I was working with senior leaders, cross-functional team. There were at times 20 people in the room. And from across the 7-state region, I thought, I need 3. I need 3 people so we can crap decided on it. Well, the process of involving people and getting people's perspective was vital for the culture they wanted. But they came up with 32 separate behaviors. And I said, oh my God, I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday.
Yeah.
Can we
Too many.
compress those? And they said, no, these are the right ones. And they were dead on it, absolutely dead on it. Within 18 months, they had moved from pretty 42% engagement compared to
Mhm.
a global organization. And they went up to 70% in 18 months. And that was a wonderful spotlights turned on. Corporates like, what are you feeding those people over there? But it
Right.
gets to you can't coach if you don't have total agreement on exactly what you mean by integrity or excellence or fun. I've got some clients who wanted to find fun. Good for you. If you can make it business relevant and make
Yep.
sure you're not teasing people, right? Because that can be quote fun. It's been really fascinating over the past 20 years to see how once senior leaders really understand that the more specific you get, well, then
Right.
people can choose. They can choose to, I get it. Why didn't you tell me that's the way you wanted us to behave around the promises we were making? You're thinking, oh, for God's sakes, right? But if you formalize it and leaders model it and leaders celebrate it and leaders coach it, et cetera, that's the accountability side, then people
Mhm.
are going to step up. And I think that one of the most exciting pieces for Mark and me in Good Comes First is our accountability model. And that,
Yeah.
you get coaches that say, You're accountable for covering that wing back. And I don't wing back. Boy, that's 1970s language, right? But that's your responsibility. Well, if they actually implement it, executed on that plan, good, bad, or then you got a coach, right? And if there's no clarity about leaders modeling, leaders engaging in day-to-day conversations, leaders holding people accountable with the quote respect rules, the values rules, these new behaviors. For example, very, very common for clients to want to formalize an integrity value. And one of the behaviors that I've coached leaders to do is be careful about, I want people to smile when they come in. I want people to, deliver their performance expectations. It's like, we're talking about smiling is a bit too surface. But what if we talk about people are validating their peers for the good work they've done this week? All of a sudden that's observable, it's measurable, but it's also setting a high bar. And I tell senior leaders all the time, as you get to this alignment stage, yes, you need all leaders tied into it, but not all of them are going to buy it. Some are going to say, I don't like these people. You're not paying me enough to be nice to these people. I'm freaking out of here, right? And I say, let them go. It's fine. Because it's going to be a battle if you try to force them to stay and their heart isn't in this. Be nice to people. And be nice is a little simplistic, but it literally is. If you can demonstrate respect and you are hoping for results, you're going to get more results in a respectful culture than a disrespectful.
Sure. Yeah, no, I love it. Define, align, and accountability, and then the refining part. One of the things that we do through the course of the week, we have everybody come up with, we have a little book. I'll actually send it to you. My wife and I wrote it, a little workbook called Core Values. And what we do is we ask them to come up with their personal core values. And then we ask the group to suggest core values for the group. And we come up with maybe 7 or 8. And then we have then come up with a separate list of all the traits and behaviors. And that list is maybe 100 traits and behaviors. And then one of the coolest exercises we do is we put up on the whiteboard the 5, 6 core values. And then we debate, discuss, share opinions of where the core values go. The traits and behaviors. Yeah. Because then what happens is, like you were talking about integrity, that happens to be our first core value all the time. But what are the behaviors and traits that would define integrity? So kind of taken from your book there, the defining part, then the aligning part is, okay, so now what we need to do is we can also interview off of those. So who are you looking for? Exactly. You're looking for those traits, behaviors, and core values.
Exactly.
And that seems to be, it's easy to do when you first open up a new business.
Yeah.
It takes a lot longer to change that culture once it's already been up and going. And you speak to that in the good comes first, how difficult that is to actually, and you say refine and change culture. How do you speak to that a little?
Yeah, it's interesting because too often, and I remember, I can't remember where I read this, and I believe it was in Harvard Business Review, and it was kind of the reference about, an executive team going off on some retreat. They go in a conference room, out comes the strategic plan, right? With maybe some new values or maybe a cool mission statement, maybe a new branding kind of thrust. And then here's all the performance results that you're going to struggle with every day for the next 365 days. And it's like, okay, so that's not exactly what we want to do. But the issue is, as we get leaders engaged in the define stage and then realizing they have to model these things, they have to kind of come to that decision to say, I'm going to be on duty every second. I tell leaders all the time, you'll never be able to run a yellow light in this town again, because that would be a reflection that you're not committed to the behaviors at your organization. So the refine stage is literally, how do you coach people who are not in alignment? How do you praise, recognize, celebrate the tar out of folks that are in alignment. And it may
Right.
well be that there's evolving markets, evolving tools, evolving needs from your customers. It's like, we need to actually throw a team of 10 over there in this region to build a new such and such. I have no idea. That's not what I do. But
Yeah.
they may never have done that before. So you want values aligned people committed to the team, committed to the customers who may have to learn new stuff really fast. So there's this interesting idea of how do you hire people that may never have worked in your company before? And you can't necessarily say, well, tell me what your successes have been. What are your accomplishments? Everyone's going to have that on the tip of their tongue, but they may not get to their work ethic. They may not get to their style. So the refined piece literally is, you can no longer tolerate bad behavior. You've defined what the behavior you want. You are now, as leaders, modeling it and measuring it. And there will be some people who would choose of their own accord, self-select out, let them go.
Right.
There will be a number of folks who are like, show me, right? And if you show up and if you're consistent, I'll sign up for this. And then there's ones that are I'm going to hang here until they toss my butt out, because I think this is dumb. I don't think this is going to sustain. I keep treating my people like cogs in a wheel with no value. No one's going to know. No one's going to know.
Yeah.
And the reality is, and we're seeing it, when you've got 4.5 million people in November voluntarily separating in the middle of a pandemic with an economy that isn't quite up to speed yet, they're not going to work for a toxic culture anymore. They're not going to work for toxic boss or toxic colleagues. So this refined stage is literally no longer tolerating bad behavior. And Gary Ridge, God love Gary. I've known Gary a long time. President, CEO of WD-40 companies. They have a wonderful tribal organization that basically used a similar approach to the culture engine. He and I talked about that years ago, to create their values. And they have a 93% engagement rate across their global workforce. And it's been 92 to 93% for the past 15 years. Doing something right.
You know, I mean, you think about the first book that kind of comes from like Good to Great, and now you look at half those companies and those guys are in jail.
They are. They are.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, but through both of your books, you use, which I love, is you use a lot of stories and you talk about a lot of companies. One of them, Bamboo, in the second book, Bamboo, which you talk about and how they define, align, and refine. And then the other company, where that's how you refer to the other company, where they didn't.
Don't name them.
Yeah, they didn't. And I see too, I ask them, especially, you know, all right. And then I guess kind of, I don't want to keep you too long, but the idea of, in order to lead others, you need to be the best version of yourself. One of the things that I work with a lot is the young people today, maybe 19 to 25 and 26.
Yeah.
And what I find is that, and I don't blame them in a way. And you know, you're of an older generation. I'm 56. So is they certainly do not trust authority, nor do they trust the hierarchy of the senior executives of companies.
Titles don't mean much. That's totally true.
Right? I mean, they don't. And when I ask them, I say, you know, if you guys can get paid, can you make more money if you go someplace else, or would it work? And they all 100% of the time, they could make more money working someplace else. And I say, well, why aren't you doing that? It's because when you're making more money but being treated disrespectfully, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
You know, there's two books that I want to definitely share with you, and you may know these gentlemen. Gentleman named Jason Hewlett, and he wrote a book called Promise to the One. And what it is it's about being true to yourself and living the values that you are looking to lead others with. And he uses an example of going out in Utah, walking his dog. The dog poops in the snow. He's cold. He comes home. He's like, you know, I'm going to go back out into the cold. And he ends up I mean, I love the story. It's such a simple little silly thing, but how I catch myself now, if I see something on the sidewalk, and normally I would pass it, I pick it up, or little things like that that I make sure I'm more aware.
Yeah.
And then the other book, which I think you would enjoy, a young man named Clint Pulver, and he wrote a book called "I Love It Here,"
Oh, that's cool.
and where you were talking to high level executives about culture and how they were creating that within the organizations. He kind of came and talks about from the employee standpoint
Great.
and why people were leaving. And if
Yeah.
both of them were the data that you've seen, and the data, it both is corroborated, where if you don't have a culture, a locker room
Yeah.
per se, where people are respected, people will take their talent someplace else. You
Yeah.
you have to have that today.
Well, absolutely so. And I think it's going to be, what did I just read? Probably a month ago, some very, very initial results of a survey by an Australian consulting firm. And they're referring to Gen AA. We don't know what the post Gen Z generation will be referred to, but it's like, this is what these kids have lived through with working from home / virtual learning / changing rules. Yeah, and I get that science changes, but these folks are going to have, I think, an even greater expectation of communicate with me, be transparent with me, be consistent with me. And I think leaders are going to be challenged by that too. So this whole approach about, if you can create an organization that truly demonstrates respect,
Right.
profits and results go up. We saw it back in the culture engine. It continues with good comes first. When you build that, engagement goes up by 40% or more. Customer service goes up by 40% or more, and results in profits by 35% or more. And of course, senior leaders go, tell me about the results gain. Again, I kind of like that one. No,
Yeah,
you don't get the results first, you get the results third.
it is. It's unbelievable. And people ask, what, the company I'm with is doing very well. And, I talk about, why are we doing really well now? We haven't changed the product. We haven't added additional ingredients. If anything, we've taken stuff away. And what we've done is just really, when we sell to a franchisee, we're not really, we always tell them, you can't buy a franchise. You have to be awarded one. And the process we go through is really, who are you as a person? Obviously the finances is important and things of that nature, but we want to really ask you and talk to you about how you're going to treat your people.
Yeah.
We're in the people business, really, is kind of what we say
Awesome.
here. So, but well, it's been awesome. I can talk forever about it. Again, I'm a huge fan of obviously the Culture Engine. That's what drew me to you. And then your second book, I love. What I would tell everybody who hopefully get to listen through the whole thing is absolutely add these to your toolbox, because what it'll do is, and there's work you actually provide, a few periods throughout both books where you actually have to stop and actually do a little bit of work.
Exactly. Exactly. Do some
Yeah.
reflection and application almost.
And I think that's another whole conversation, but it's always weird how people will say, oh, I want this, and they point to this goal. And I say, all right, well, are you willing to do this, and this? And they're like, well, do I have to? I'm like, if you want that, then yeah, you have to do the work. The book's not going to do it for you. You got to do the work. The tool doesn't do the work. You use the tool to get the work done. And both of these tools are definite things you need to add to your success toolbox. To make yourself the best version of yourself in order to lead others, but to create a culture within a company, create a culture on a team. Any coaches, I think this is a great book for coaches. Absolutely. And more importantly today, the family. We need good families. Good comes first in families as well.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Well, John, it's been delightful. I so appreciate your worldview and your passion for culture.
Thank you. And where can people find you, so that obviously your website? Will
Absolutely.
be the best
Website for
place.
the book is goodcomesfirst.com. My main site is drivingresultstthroughculture.com. But
Love it.
Good Comes First is a little easier to spell. So maybe start there.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, this is Coach Hughes from another podcast for Be Best You with Chris Edmonds. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. It's been an honor.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll get to speak again. If you come out with another book, we will see what we can do.
Awesome.
All
John,
right.
appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, sir.